G'day everyone, welcome to the very first episode of The Missing Link. Would like to welcome you along to what we hope will be a fantastic opportunity to get insight and education into the industry. The background that we don't hear about in general terms when there's been incidents and accidents, there's always some sort of a background. My very first guest here, and I'm honoured to have them here, is Sharon Middleton and Steve Shearer. How are you guys?
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, really good, Bruce.
That's great. Thank you for coming along. Now, we're going to be talking about the Whiteline case, your business Whiteline, Sharon, and like we covered this on Copy Southbound, and it had a lot of feedback from it, and there's been a lot that's happened because of that. But we thought with the current situation of what's going on at the moment, if we would make this first episode about our fuel crisis. And a lot of people are going to say, yeah, I've heard it all on Sunrise when my wife was watching it and she sent me a message about what's going on. But I know that you two have been doing a lot towards this, and in the background there's a lot going on and how it's going to affect us. I think that we can all agree this isn't going to be finished overnight. That's a long-term issue that we've got. And it's really going to hurt probably more than anything that I've seen in my lifetime. When you have a look at things like COVID, where everyone was getting parked up and all the crisis we went through there, I think that that's just going to be a little bit like a kids' playground episode compared to what we're going to be going through here. We're seeing companies who are copying. They were saying like fueled up one day and then the following day I fueled my truck up and it was $500 extra to fuel up, plus running out of fuel and what have you. There's groups talking about boycotting and actually parking the trucks up. I think there's always been talk about, we need another Razorback. We've heard that plenty of times over the years. Kind of got a funny feeling if it's ever going to happen, it's probably going to happen now, because I don't think that we're getting enough backing from the government, which has to happen immediately. Like, companies are burning big time here and not many are going to be able to sustain this for much longer.
I think, Bruce, the evidence is pretty clear. Government, state and federal, they're talking about it. But despite everything we've all been saying, I don't think, and despite the experience of COVID, I don't think people in government, including ministers from the Prime Minister down and Premier down, I don't think they've really got their head around the enormity of what will happen if we don't address this and keep the trucks moving. It is the real worry is that if the war ends at midnight tonight, miraculously, and it's not going to, but if it did, the fuel supply issue is going to continue for a couple of months. But then the financial recovery for people, Sharon knows all about it because she runs trucks. The financial recovery will take a lot longer than the recovery of the fuel supply. This is deadly bloody serious, and governments have got to wake up to the absolute enormity. My personal view is government needs to stop worrying about its own income stream and recognise the threat that this presents to the country, and dip their hand in their pocket and get serious about providing what's needed to get people through. COVID proved how essential trucking is within days of the borders closing. People need to remember that, but this is way worse than COVID.
People forgot about that pretty quickly, just what the transport industry did. And unfortunately, social media is pretty toxic when it comes to people having their say and thinking they know what it's all about. And we've all been on the receiving end of that at times. The bit that I really want to make clear that I love about you two is that you're both very vocal, not just on the outside, but also behind closed doors. Both of you go to ministers and go to government and fight for the industry, not just for yourselves, but for the industry. And I admire that. I mean, what you went through with the Whiteline case, Shaz, I think would be enough to destroy most people. And I think it took a toll on you pretty heavily as it was. And yet you decided, and I remember you saying to me, I've decided that for the rest of my life, I'm going to try and make sure this does not happen to anybody else. And I mean, that's, I can't do any more than just admire that aggression you've got in there, that fight you've still got in you, even though you copped it. Most people would say, well, good, I don't have any fight left in me, but you've turned around and said, I'm going to make this industry better as a result of this. But it was to your detriment.
Yeah, I look, you don't come out of something like that without a chink in your armour. There's no two ways about it. And for myself and for Bob, when we went through what we went through, there was never any question that we were going to continue to do what we did. We knew that we needed an outcome. We were obviously really taken back with losing King Bowley. And so it was about, clearing his name, and it was about, yes, this has got to stop. The authorities have to talk to industry, have to engage with industry and work with industry because at the end of the day, we're all just trying bloody hard to make a living. And with the millions of kilometres that we're all doing, unfortunately, at some point in our careers, we are going to come across a situation that is out of our control. And so you need to know that when something like that happens, that you can collectively work together to get to the bottom of it and work together and not be persecuted. It's taken, it was 5 years out of our life as we fought it. And as you say, it's still going to take a long time to mentally recover from that.
Yeah.
I must say support from around the country, particularly once the initial podcast ran that you ran, because it actually explained a lot of what occurred. And so a lot of operators were ringing me, telling me they could empathise with it, understand it. And, I got incredible support. But to your point before about, speaking up about industry, like me and others that sit on boards and committees everywhere, we're all volunteers. And we get roped in and asked to do these things on a voluntary basis to explain our stories, explain what we know, so that people like Steve, who are in CEO roles around the country and other associations around the country, you want those people to be not connected with trucks because you want them to have the bureaucratic and political nous to go fight your arguments.
Yes.
But for them to be able to do that, they need people that operate in industry telling them what's going on the ground, tell them what's going on logistically, so they can go and fight those battles for us in language and communication that is understood by the bureaucracy and by the politicians. And that is another level.
Yeah.
So when you get criticised for that, I understand if you've never worked on a committee or a board, you would just see a problem out there and you would think, why can't this just be bloody well fixed? I get that. That's how probably what drove me to wanting to do voluntary work in the beginning is why is it that we can't just fix this problem? I'm not saying this will be our problem yet, but we've just had an election in South Australia. We had a very good working relationship with our previous transport ministers, but we've now got another new one. So that means for us, we've got to build the relationship again. We've got to sit him down and explain what the current issues are for trucking. And, he may pick it all up very quickly and that's great, but at the moment it's a little bit of an unknown factor for us. And
there's also the risk, a lot of bureaucrats love it when there's a change in the cabinet allocations, and this new minister's the 11th minister we've had since I started working with SARTA, and I can tell you behind the scenes there are some bureaucrats who grab the opportunity of having a new minister to wipe the slate clean from whatever progress we were making on certain issues and try and lock that minister into a certain way of thinking before we get to them, which is why Shaz and I get in there as fast as we can. I've already requested a meeting with the new minister because we need to get in there, and while they're got an open mind, because this new minister, I don't think Shaz has any strong background in trucking, and we'll start from the absolute basics because we can't afford to risk a new minister coming in thinking, oh shit, why don't we just put all the freight on trains? That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, it does if you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And why don't we do this and why don't we do that? So, and one of the lessons that
social media has been, when you look at comments that people make, actually shows us how dumb some people are.
Yeah.
And how naive is probably the word. I shouldn't say dumb, but how naive people are.
Yeah.
With those sorts of comments, because people make those comments all the time, and this is what should run and rail. Or even one of the ministers the other day there with Barnaby Joyce, and she turned around and she said, "Oh, this is a good excuse to go electric, isn't it?"
Yeah.
And it was, and he belted his head against the camera, and rightly so. Like, what a ridiculous comment to make.
But when you've got a superficial level of knowledge, things that seem to make sense, people talk about. The worry is when those people are in positions of power and decision making. The line we use, and we developed it years ago, with a new minister, we explain that trucking is like the cardiovascular system in our body. We take all the stuff in throughout the entire body, even into the tiniest little capillaries. We take in the energy and the oxygen and all of that, and we remove the rubbish. Trucking is just like that. We are the cardiovascular system of the community and the economy. When you explain it like that and then point out those trains, they're great, bulk, long haul, but they're like great big arteries.
Just an artery, I was just going to say that.
They can only go as far as...
Great way to look at it.
Yeah.
My wife would get all this because she's a nurse, so she'd understand that better than anybody.
And you have
what a great way to look at it.
Yeah, and when you explain it like that, people go, oh yeah. And then you're on the road to getting somewhere with them.
Well, and I think, we've said it before, we need a robust rail network and we need a robust road transport system. We just can't, we've got to be sustainable every day of the year. So we can't just be there when rail fails. We all need to be doing, apart from supplying the cardiovascular system, that needs to be sustainable every day.
All the time.
And so, whenever there's an incident or whenever there's an issue, and there's always such a lot of hype on social media, it just takes us away from the main game of what we're trying to do, and that's to move product from A to B safely and efficiently and keep business and communities alive. And this whole, sort of vicious kind of debate and fight over it is really unhelpful, because at the end of the day, we need things moved.
Yeah, and I suppose when we go back to, and we are going to have some good chats about your case and about Whiteline and some of the changes that have been made, and I know that we've got Paul Alsbury coming along as well to have a chat with us from the NHVR. So this is what this podcast will be about, and we'll be just having a number of different parts to each episode. So this first one though, let's talk about the heart. If the heart's our fuel supply, that's not getting the fuel into anywhere. Yep. And that's our problem is at the moment the heart's failing. So can you please tell us your thoughts on this? I've really been intrigued with chatting to you off air about this and what your thoughts are, because it goes so much deeper than what anyone's hearing.
Well, how about I talk for a few minutes about the lobbying we're doing with government at all levels, and Chaz is a key part of that as president of SARTA, but Chaz could also give a really good perspective from an operator's point of view. The challenge, and let's take the new minister that we've now got as a starting point. I can almost guarantee that new minister will not understand until we explain it that a truck gets 1 kilometre out of a litre of fuel. A truck will do 250,000 k's a year if it's doing line haul type work compared to a car. The fuel cost in a trucking business used to be 33 or 35%. Now it's closer to 70% of the cost structure because of a 94% increase in the cost of fuel. The terminal gate price since February has gone up by 94%. 94%.
Wow, just swallow that for a second.
In less than a month, right? So, and then you explain our profit margin's 3%. So then the next point is an increase of just 10% in the fuel price wipes out our profit margin, Minister. But it's actually gone up, not 10%, it's gone up 94%, and it's climbing. We have no capacity to absorb that. We have to pass it on. Oh, and by the way, as the political pressure mounts on government to help the community by cutting fuel excise, you must not repeat former Prime Minister Morrison's mistake. He cut the fuel excise by 20 cents but did not reduce the road user charge. That wiped out the fuel tax credit, which the great bulk of the industry relies on because they pay the full excise. When it comes to BAS, they know they've bought, say, 1 million litres of fuel. They know that they're going to get 1 million litres times roughly 20 cents back as their fuel tax credit. So when they are accounting for their BAS, they know how much extra they need to make up in cash, right? Mm-hmm. You take that fuel tax credit away, so a company with 3 or 4 trucks doing 250,000 Ks a year, they'll use 1 million litres of fuel at least. If the government cuts the fuel excise but not the road user charge, and if they cut it by 20 cents, the excise, that operator would have to find $200,000 somewhere to make up their BAS.
How do they do that?
They can't do that. So explaining those realities to ministers and getting them to get their head around it is critical, because every crisis we've had in the past, we've expressed concern. But when the crisis is over, we're still there as an industry. And there are bureaucrats who say, see, they don't need it. The people in Treasury and Finance in Canberra loved it when Morrison effectively wiped out the fuel tax credit, because they treated that as a test to see if the industry could survive. The industry survived, but a lot of businesses didn't. Some people committed suicide, tragically. But what they overlook is that the ones who survived are still recovering financially. Do that to us again, it's not going to happen. We won't recover. So that's why I said before, government's got to understand the enormity of this from a truck operator's point of view and not think we're just crying poor. We're not. We're crying broke and broken.
Yeah.
And look, the reality is too, especially small family businesses, which 75% of our industry, that's what it's made up of. They may have a credit facility with a particular fuel company. At the moment, because the fuel is so expensive, they're hitting their credit limits so much quicker, so they're having to make more regular payments to keep their credit terms with the fuel companies under control, which means cash flow. Where's that coming from? Who's paying quicker to accommodate the fact that you're having to pay more regularly for the fuel?
Yeah.
It's particularly in remote and rural Australia, which is what I can speak of more about because that's what I do, the run to Perth. In recent times there's been, the shocking floods, and the train was derailed or the track was damaged, so the train wasn't running. So there's been all these additional operators from the eastern seaboard trying to keep the west connected and been crossing the paddock that wouldn't normally.
Yeah.
So even before the war crisis and the pricing crisis, there was already a supply problem out there. And, when you've got a 36.5 metre road train on or a 42 metre PBS unit on, and you get to a particular place where it's always in your schedule and your rostering that's where you fuel and that's where your fuel accounts are set up, and they're out, what do? You can't just turn the thing around and go back down the road and fuel somewhere else.
Yeah, a colleague of ours was telling us just last week that there was a number of trucks that were stopped at Tamworth and they couldn't hook up and get out to Perth because they had to fuel at Burke and Burke was out of fuel.
Yeah.
So they had to just sit and wait until they knew that there was fuel at Burke.
And so when industry hears, and last week, Monday of last week, I attended the roundtable meeting called by Premier Peter Malinauskas. And we had a bunch of industry people, different industries, just one per industry, and I was there for trucking around the table. So we had a lot of our customer industries there. But the Federal Minister, Chris Bowen, came on for 15 or 20 minutes, and good on him for making himself available. But I made the point to the South Australian Premier before Chris Bowen came on that no one in the industry is believing him because the Premier just said, look, there's plenty of supply. And I thought, right, got to speak up. No one is believing it because we're not seeing the hard evidence that satisfies us that there is enough fuel on land or in our territorial waters, because that's when they start counting it as being here and what's coming. And no one's got much confidence that there won't be soon a major supply shortage. So governments need to understand, you can tell us to calm down as much as you like, but we're all, as industries, all industries, we're having to look to the reality of what happens if I run out of fuel. And so they stock up, they fill up their bulk tanks. You can't blame them for doing it. governments in situations like this have to be a lot more open and honest. And instead of saying everything's okay, they need to say, look, there is an issue and we're managing it. But what people see in the paper is that day by day the pressure builds and eventually the government says, yeah, all right, there is a crisis. As soon as they do that, people say, you bloody knew that a week ago.
Yeah.
And so why should we believe you now? I think government needs to work a lot harder. They've appointed a lady called Anthea Harris to coordinate the fuel supply and distribution, and I feel sorry for her because it's a bugger of a job.
There's no winners there, is there?
No, and the government's rushing legislation through to give the Fair Work Commission emergency power to make emergency orders on fuel and levies. But the reality is, so far, nothing sensible really has been suggested for that, and it's going to take a bit of time. So governments need to be prepared to step up and bite hard bullets sooner, like we've only got X fuel, we need to do something to reduce consumption and share it around, but they will hold off until they are right at the cliff's edge from some tough decisions like fuel rationing because of the politics. Now, most cars use petrol, but there are plenty that use diesel.
There's a lot more now that use diesel than what they used to.
That's right.
Back in the 70s and 80s when we had fuel crises, then there wasn't as many diesel cars around, but golly, every ute out there is diesel.
And then we get suggestions from some people.
All the tradies and everyone out there all run on diesel.
Yeah.
But then what scares me is when you get to, well, we've got a war looming at the moment.
Yeah.
And all bullshit aside, like there's been talk about this war for the last 5 years, and we know numerous people that are in armed services that were told 3 years ago to prepare for war with China within 5 years. So it's been on the cards, and here it is. There is just I think we're the greater chance now, and this isn't trying to put a scare tactic. I'm just a realist, and I can see that we're getting closer than ever now. All emergency services and all armed services vehicles are all diesel.
Yeah.
So they're going to be preserving diesel for them as well.
That'll be the first priority.
We'll come to a grinding halt soon.
Yeah.
I don't think this is crying wolf either, Steve.
No, it's not.
I think this is just realistic.
And there's all these other flow-on issues. There's customers that are now cutting back on their orders. They're relying on stock that might be being held in a warehouse and not booking those extra services that they might have run. So, for some family businesses and trucking businesses, they've got this routine, each week of what their truck does, a particular run it does. Well, they're finding that run isn't there at the moment. So if it is there, it's there, but the fuel is what it is, and they're struggling to pay for that, plus cash flow. If it's not there, it sort of buggers up the whole routine that they have of where the truck travels to and from, because we know that there's people that are going to use stock that's being held in warehouses as opposed to moving anything more. We've got to pay more for it with a fuel levy on it. And it's a complicated thing to sort out because a lot of businesses have relationships with their customers or their tow hauliers, or if they're contractors, that involves them using that contractor's fuel. There's other equipment that they might borrow and use that, is part of the relationship, the working relationship. Yep. So it all creates a very complicated little web in trying to keep everybody moving, keeping everybody their head above water, because everyone's scenario is a little bit different. So,
but meanwhile, fuel prices are way up. And there are plenty of people, you don't have to be particularly smart and switched on, you don't have to be a qualified economist to figure this out. It's not just fuel excise, GST gets paid on fuel.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people saying, what about all the extra GST that the federal government's raking in from the sale of fuel at the massively hiked prices? That's a windfall. So it's not unreasonable for people to look at it and say, so government's actually getting all this extra money and they're sitting there watching all of us suffer and things beginning to grind to a halt. In all honesty and integrity, government can't just sit there and do nothing. And they can't just pontificate about, we'll look at emergency orders and we'll do things. Great. But you're getting all this extra GST revenue. People out in the sticks and in the cities are hurting. Sure, you may have to ration fuel to a certain degree, but if you do, don't pick one fuel brand and say, we'll just supply that fuel company, because there are all sorts of logistic reasons why that won't work and keeping the freight moving. But look at the money you're pulling in and show some real integrity with the community and say, yep, we've got money we weren't expecting to get. We're going to utilise that money to provide some support.
Yeah, well, look, even if trucks park up because they can't afford the fuel, who's going to make the truck payment? Who's going to cover the rego? Who's going to cover the insurance? What about all the other overheads? So
it's not just fuel.
Park up's one option, but if you've got nothing coming in, how do you pay for everything else?
Shaz, how has it gone with trying to pass on a fuel levy to customers?
It's really difficult because the people that you're trying to talk to about it, they're having to talk to someone as well. It's a really, I think because it's come on so quick and so fast, it's caught everybody off guard. So, I mean, what the conversations actually have to be about is, now that we can see that it's not just a flash in the pan thing, it's here and it's going to be here with us for a while, that it's not just going to be what we need to do now, but it's going to have to continue on after things hopefully return to normality, because there's going to be this lag where people were caught out.
Yep.
So, I mean, at the moment, in all fairness, everyone is just scrambling, trying to work out what the hell to do. I think initially everyone was in shock and everyone just sort of thought, oh, it won't impact to the extent it has. Now it's pretty bloody obvious. To your point, 1 minute, the fuel I paid for yesterday was $1.62. Now it's $2.94, $3 and over, overnight. So I just don't know how
such a knock-on effect. So what about, Steve,
can I just tell you about our survey?
Big players,
Yep.
Can I just ask, like
Sure.
when you look at big players, and I'm just going to pluck the names, but like you look at the Woolworths and Coles and Aldi's and Bunnings and all of that sort of stuff there, where companies like that, are they more favourable with copying the fuel levy, or is it the smaller ones that don't?
Yeah, well, from what we're hearing, some are, but the bigger businesses are as bad, if not worse, than bureaucracy in terms of how fast they move when you're trying to charge them more. If they want to charge you more, they can move pretty quick. But we're finding that it's taking a while, and what we're hearing, some big name brands were initially saying, no, we're not going to wear a levy. And the SARTA board actually talked about whether or not we should get into naming and shaming. Because we've got to protect the industry, and we decided responsibly we wouldn't do that. But a couple of the board members said, yeah, they've had problems with these large corporates, but those corporates are now waking up and turning because their own internal machinery. But SARTA's run a survey, and it's still running, with an average fleet size of 22 rigs that have responded. 83.5% of them have not managed to fully pass on the fuel increase.
Wow. And
the average portion of the increase they've managed to pass on is 42%. So 82% of them haven't passed it on fully, and those that have only managed to get less than half. That is not sustainable. And that's because customers are either got their head in the sand or they don't know how they're going to handle it. Here's the simple truth. Fuel prices go up. Truck operators can't absorb it, have to pass it on. Their customers probably can't absorb it to a large degree. They have to pass it on, and whether we like it or not, it all flows right through to the end consumers, and we can't put our head in the sand and say, well, that's not fair. That is just the reality.
Well, and there's been a lot from different operators we've spoken to that they've said they've got contracts that don't allow for any negotiations. But this is an unprecedented, catastrophic world event. And so to sit by your laurels and stick by what your contract says at a time when it's visible. You'd have to be blind Freddy to see, that it's not real. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not someone trying to profiteer. It's someone trying to survive, trying to just stay alive
and keep their customers' business going by continuing to service them.
Yeah.
If they think they can hold an operator to a contract and because of that contract not pay a levy, well, that operator's either going to walk away or go broke, and another operator's going to have exactly the same issue, and operators will start saying, well, we're not working for them because we're going to go broke if we do.
Well, and the flow on too, I'm sure there'd be a lot of members of the Heavy Vehicle Industry Association that supply the industry that'd be very concerned about all the orders that they have in place at the moment.
Yeah.
Who is going to be able to afford to take delivery of trucks, trailers, dollies, equipment at the moment? Who's going to be able to continue to pay for all the repairs and parts to maintain the equipment? Then who then, as part of all the regulatory and red tape and, all the on-road enforcement, who's going to be able to afford to pay for all of
the fines
and everything else that goes with that?
Yeah.
So because you can't afford to do so.
There's always an argument about how crap a lot of sections of road are that are just destroying vehicles on the road. Made it very clear that in the past, and we'll be talking with Paul Osbury about this, but we know that the NHVR don't lay asphalt. They don't go out filling out potholes and that sort of thing. It's not their job, but they have to enforce that the vehicles are safe on the road, but the vehicles are getting destroyed by the road. But people are going to be turning around saying, we're just going to let that go for one more run. That's what's going to end up happening because they just can't afford to fix them. It's going to bury them. And when you look at, and I'm just plucking again a figure out of the air and names, but like Woolies and Coles and Aldi and those big players there, Bunnings and whatever, if they just put 10 cents per item on everything, just 10 cents extra, which means that when you go and buy groceries, and I know the cost of living is through the roof too, but to us cop in an extra, $10 if we've gone into Woolies to do an order because everything's gone up 5 or 10 cents each, that would cover the levy.
Yeah,
don't you reckon?
Easily. And particularly, people like the Bunnings and so on who, are not selling food. I think they could do it a lot more easily. The supermarkets are very price sensitive, but they've all got the same problem. They're all going to have to pass it on. And at the end of the day, the community might have to cut back on things that, are a bit of a luxury at times like this and not do that. Instead do what any sensible family does. You deal with the basics first and foremost. And if that means you've got no money left to go to the pictures and have a fancy party, well, you just have to put that off until we recover.
Yeah, and people say when they're, for butchers, they still have to eat, they still buy meat, but they're buying sausages and rissoles, then they're buying steak, but that'll then knock back to the farming community as well. And
it's all flows on. I did a trip to Perth over the weekend, and the roadhouses that I went into, they're all concerned that people aren't going to travel in their caravans everywhere because they can't afford the fuel.
And just for the record, for the people that are listening and watching this, what were you driving?
I was driving a Mercedes-Benz.
Right. Yeah. Elaborate.
A 2658 Benz.
Yeah, so we're not talking a little A380 car.
No.
No, so you were a road train?
No, I wasn't actually because I was running bobtail on this trip because I was relocating a vehicle. But normally to Perth, everything is road train and B triple.
Yeah. So Sharon does drive a truck.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't think so looking at you, and I don't mean that in any way disrespectful. We're amazed actually, but that's the one thing with you is as lovely as you look sitting here, and you've got your nice jacket on, that sort of thing. But you get behind the wheel and you run road trains as well.
Absolutely.
And so you're not someone that just runs a transport company and you're all about figures. You know exactly what to do, what all of your drivers do, and that really needs to be pointed out.
Yeah.
That's why I know you hate being labelled anything, and we don't like terms like legend and magnate and all of that sort of stuff. But that's why I have so much respect for both of you, and I know that with Whiteline, incident that you had there, like Steve, you and SARTA got right behind Sharon, and you've helped a lot of people win battles. And that's why I have so much respect. I didn't really elaborate on that at the beginning, but I want to make that really clear, because it's not just a matter of sitting back and letting it all happen.
Yep.
And it's no different to consumers sitting back and just waiting to see what's going to happen. And, if there's a panic, we'll go and make sure we get our toilet paper, which is what happened in COVID, and everyone had a fight over it there. You guys are full on there trying to fix what we do on a daily basis.
I mean, really,
And hats
to that,
off to you for that too.
Thanks, Bruce. But really, to that point, when I think about our case and what happened, it was because I'd done so much driving that I was at a level where I knew what I needed to fight.
Yes.
So if I hadn't done all of that, maybe I mightn't have understood it as much. But because I had spent so much time on the road, and I'm not unlike a lot of, I've watched a lot of terrific women now in my time. It's becoming more and more, a career of choice. And it's really wonderful to see, the women coming through, and a lot of women that have two-upped with their husbands for decades, and do an incredible job out there. They're just little silent heroes that just out there doing what they do. But for me, it was always about, I didn't want to ask drivers to do something that I wouldn't do myself or wasn't capable of doing myself. Sure, physically, when you see my stature, some of the physical jobs are a bit tougher, but when it comes to being able to do the line haul and the sort of work that we do, I'm more than capable of being able to do that. So I like getting out there with my team, and when I do that, I can actually come back with a lot of knowledge, and that's what I'm saying. I engaged in conversations with these roadhouses, and they know that trucking at the moment is their lifeline. That's what's keeping them going, because they're seeing such a decline in the people that are holidaying.
And the tourist thing is big. Like we had a run that we were going on in a few weeks' time, and it's just a vintage vehicle run. And I sat down and I was taking the old Denning on it, which gets about 2.9 kilometres a litre. But when I sat down and did the math on the fuel at $3.50, and a few guys said, it won't be at $3.50. And I'm going, it will be. Well, it will be, easy. And that was what I did a few weeks ago, and I added up the fuel, and it was like $2,400 to do a 1,600 kilometre round trip. And I thought, I just can't do that. And as it is, we're too busy with work, but that's going to affect that. That's just a little truck run. But when you look at all the other bits there, caravanning, touristing there, and grain nomads and everything is massive at the moment. And even this weekend, we're meant to be going on a family trip with vans, and they all pulled the pin on and said, it's getting a little bit exy, we'll hold back. And then you've got things like, like the Monday Bash, which gets 14,000 people out there, and we've been out to that plenty of times. There's a lot of people that are going to pull a pin on that.
Oh, Easter's going to be as quiet as on the road.
Very quiet, and that'll have a knock-on effect with caravan parks and restaurants and everything else. And, so it's already starting to show on the roads. Of a weekend, it seems to be getting that little bit quieter. And
even in the cities, Bruce. I said to the minister the other day, the minister that's just stopped being the minister, driving in for a meeting, less cars on the road, and everybody's driving slowly. Even the moronic hoons have backed off. Because Dad's not giving them any more money. It's really, really noticeable, and I think people will start making the decision, well, I'm not driving into work. If I can't catch a bus or double up with somebody, I'll work from home. There'll be a whole range of options, but
I really am really scared for all the people in the industry. I'm quite emotional about it, because I know what it's like to be sitting at the desk and table trying to work out how you're going to juggle everything. We're all pretty good at throwing the airs in the ball and making it all happen and moving stuff around and doing what we've got to do to survive. But I am never been scareder for the industry than what I am at the moment, and the challenges that are facing trucking families and businesses. It's only early days in all of this, and
that is the scary bit, that what we're dealing with now is a crisis, but it's only early days. And I can't see it as you said, even if Donald goes and decides that he's going to pull out the big guns there and finish it overnight, we're going to have a knock-on effect that's going to last for
months.
Not months, but
Yeah.
probably into a couple of years for
Yeah.
people already. And I think that there's a lot of people that are going to go to the wall with what we're seeing now. They just can't sustain it.
So one of our great strengths as an industry is that fantastic Aussie character of we keep putting one foot in front of the other. Sure, people might complain a bit, but they keep putting one foot in front of the other and the nose to the grindstone. This is not the time to just keep doing that without acting positively to ensure your business survives. You've got to do something to recover the fuel price because you won't survive otherwise. And people, I'm concerned that too many people in the industry who traditionally have been price takers and in no position to negotiate will just keep going with the flow, but they'll all hit the wall together. And we, as a country, we can't afford that. And at the moment, there is no positive sign that there's a solution just around the corner where they're going to get help that will fix it. People need to take it on their own shoulders to talk to their customers and say, mate, can't keep doing this work for you unless you pay this levy. Just can't. Or do something that somehow helps overcome it by finding ways to increase their volume and maybe survive through an increased volume, but not just keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's not going to work.
I don't think we're going to be able to rely on the government to do anything quickly. That's the problem. They may do something, but they always tend to be a little bit slow in making some decisions like that, and it'll be a little bit too little too late, I think, for a lot of people.
Well,
unless somehow we can get in their ear now and say you have to act right now.
Well, me and my colleagues and all the association elected reps like Sharon, we're making a lot of noise behind the scenes with ministers and governments. Those ministers are hearing whispers in their ears from people in Treasury and Finance who say, yeah, truckies always say that. It's crap, Minister. They'll be all right. I know that's happening.
Wow.
And because, as I said before, all the past crises that we've gone through, we've still been there the next day. As an industry, we've survived, and they have the arrogance to think, well, we can just let the truckies survive again. Well, no, this is too big. It is too substantial. And the flow on to the entire community when we're not able to supply and act like the cardiovascular system and suddenly your hand goes numb because you're not getting oxygen to your hand, it'll be like that. And the community is going to get really, really wound up.
Well, I'm not sure that it's acceptable for any of us with trucks to have the level of risk that we do and to be trying to fly by the seat of our pants and deal with this.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's one industry that's needed danger money from day dot.
Yeah, and it's like, how is that acceptable? Where is there reward for effort for that? And really, where is the checking in with the people that have got trucks and running little businesses and got employees that they're trying to protect and look after? Where is the "Are you okay" for them? Where is that?
This morning I got an email from Melissa Weller at Healthy Heads and Sheds, and they've released a program that they're rushing out expressly to help people handle the stress of this current crisis, and we'll run it out through SARTA. So they're at least thinking about it. But as I think you said at our board meeting and also Wendy Fennell, wouldn't it be great if people in cars see a truck and give a toot and say, how you going, mate, you okay? But there's no point being superficial about it. But this industry has tended to hide the stress. It's not just about the drivers. Drivers are critically important, but all the little business owners, the families, they take the stress home. They think about it all night and it gets to them. And we need to support all of them as well.
And like there's other things like Cam, WRF Executive Director, he's been fighting hard because apart from this fuel issue, they've had all the natural disasters up north of Perth and access and been trying to streamline and advocate longer configurations But just the red tape and the bureaucracy to get that over the line is proving far more difficult than it should be. Like we all need to be safe, and we don't want to make willy-nilly decisions without them being based on, good safety cases.
But not risk averse.
But yes, exactly. And so, Cam has been calling for, I think it's 53 metres, but, been met with bureaucratic bump that makes it not possible.
So back in 1975, Cyclone Tracy, was that 75?
Yep.
One of the most famous stories out of that is the Defence Force had a whole lot of trucks up there, and it was obvious immediately that the community needed those trucks. But the officer in charge wasn't prepared to release them until the paperwork was done. But all the paperwork blew out the window at 100 kilometres an hour. There was a stupid bureaucratic delay in doing what needs to be done, and what Sharon was just talking about is a modern day example of it. In a situation like this, we're not talking about running 53.5 metre trucks at 50% higher weight for the next 20 years that will destroy the roads the way they're currently built. We're talking about getting through a crisis.
Yeah.
And we did it a while back when there was another crisis, and we proved we could do it safely. Just like to keep Darwin alive, trucks from South Australia went through Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and up into the Territory because of the floods. The routes were all approved. A lot of work got done. We didn't squash a cat, let alone a human being. Floods happen again, and we've got to go through the whole damn process again to get the approvals. I mean, that is just rubbish.
This is happening at the moment, mate. You've heard that Mount Victoria up in the Blue Mountains has suddenly failed. They've got this bridge that's 140 odd years old, and it takes a lot of traffic and a lot of heavy vehicles over it there. And the road started to subside and started to give way there, so they closed it. So we've got Mount Victoria, the road that runs parallel with that, is basically Bell's line of road. It takes you through Lithgow and pops you out the other side of Mount Vic. And the road that links the two of them is the Darling Causeway. And we've been having customers go up there with their trucks that have got permits to run along one way, and they've turned around and said, we can't come back the other way because your permit doesn't allow it. And they won't let them run it four-way. And we're going, hang on, but the road's closed. No, you have to go and reassess. And we know what the permit shambles is like at the moment with the regulator. And they said they're going to get it right soon. That was 4 years ago. So I'm hoping that they're going to fix it up pretty soon. But they're actually just stopping transport in the tracks and they're knocking them off. And what is happening, what I heard the other day, and I don't know if this is gospel or not, is that the Darling Causeway just can't handle the amount of traffic on it. It's starting to break up already. It's only been a couple of weeks, and they reckon it's going to be for about 3 months. And so they're reducing weights, I've been told, because of that. They said they can't do it, but all these guys, they've got enough trouble going on with the fuel and everything else, but they've budgeted all of their jobs there on running, say, a truck and quad dog at 57.5 tonne. They're going, no, you're back to 50.5. They're pulling them back. So they're not making enough. There's not enough fruit in it for them to keep saying we're doing well, and their fuel's gone through the roof.
So isn't the question, why the hell was that allowed to happen? Why wasn't the work being done to assess the bridge? They knew it was an old bridge. It was probably built for horse and cart, not for trucks, let alone the big trucks. Why weren't they focused on the fact that that's a significant freight route, and why wasn't it in the budget to upgrade the bridge earlier? And I reckon I know the answer. At the time, politicians involved didn't see the political value in it. When I first moved to Canberra after uni, in my first job, first day, I got given a 3-inch thick report on the collapsing brick sewer system in Launceston, and to test me out, see if I was any good, he said, I want a 1-page summary on Monday. I came in on Monday, I handed him that, he didn't even look at it, he put it on the desk and he said, you've got 1 point. What's your 1 point that you've got out of that? And I said, seems pretty obvious to me that governments and politicians see no no political value for them and no vote pulling value in fixing something that's out of sight underground until it collapses. Then they'll blame the predecessors and brag that they're fixing it. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, you're going to go a long way in Canberra." because that is the way of thinking. So that bridge could have and should have, and I'll bet you there were engineers making the point about it, but you've got to get it through the bean counters and the ministers to get it funded. We've got a lot of bridges in this country where we should be bringing forward the replacement of those bridges, but we're not.
Well, what about even just the fact that by not allowing that combination, how many more trucks is that going to take? How many more trucks, how many more drivers, how much more fuel?
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of counterintuitive, you know. So I was just going to say as well, you know, with all the stresses and everything we've all got, and don't get me wrong, I've got a pushy and I love riding my push bike. But at the moment on the Nullarbor, there's all soft shoulders because of all the rain. So, you know, and the road is quite narrow in lots of places. There is a bike race running from Fremantle to Sydney at the minute, and they're racing to win. So they race their bike however long they need to race their bike in whatever gear they're wearing.
And bicycles we're talking about.
Push bikes.
Push bikes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Seriously, I don't understand that. It's a major freight route. It's got so much extra volume of traffic on it because, you know, of the weather conditions and the track being out and all this sort of thing. And we've got people that think that that's okay to do that.
And they're unescorted. And if you're unlucky as a truck driver, you're coming along behind, you come over one of the little rises and suddenly there's a cyclist in front of you that you didn't know was there because they're not escorted. It's an unofficial race and you're just unlucky enough to have a truck coming the other way at a spot where the shoulders on the road are crap and you've got and you haven't got room to brake. You've got to try and move your truck and not run over that cyclist, and there's a truck coming the other way.
Try not to suck them underneath too.
Yes,
Well, and
and if either of you go get your wheels off the edge, you're gone.
It's over. You roll your dog, or you know, it's a disaster. And I think about the 5 years we went through of hell. Now,
and imagine that happening.
if that happens,
And that's no different to someone suiciding in front of a truck and they come and do an investigation on you, which is a whole other can of worms.
Yep.
But when you look at push bike riders, they've made it very clear. I mean, any of these dicks that wear Lycra think that they actually have a halo and a protection bubble around them, and it's their right to get out there and ride. And so they'll get out and do it because it's their right. And they don't think it's their right when they suddenly get run over by somebody. They're suddenly crying poor and saying, well, I should have been allowed to do that. You know, but they're always, I mean, no,
we don't
I
let
won't start,
cyclists.
but it's something that's bugged me from back when I was driving. The attitude of them there.
well, that
stupid
race in
people.
previous years has resulted in fatalities.
Yeah, there's about 8 or 9
you know,
deaths so
so
far.
I'm not sure how that's acceptable and how that responsibility
Where's their
should
risk
be.
assessment?
Yeah, it shouldn't be put on the industry.
I put it to the minister the other week when I was mentioning it, when just before our state election, Minister Emily Burt rang me and I told her about the bike race. And I said, Minister, we don't let cyclists ride down the Southeast Freeway, you know, that steep descent. She said, no, of course not, it's dangerous. I said, so why do we let them ride across the air highway on a major freight route that's not wide enough for 2 oncoming trucks to pass safely at the point where the cyclist is?
You better be careful what you say, because $30 million of our money that's been set aside for repairing roads, they might put into a fucking bike lane across the Nullarbor.
Well, yeah. Or maybe...
So careful what you wish for.
Or maybe, Bruce, they could make the smart, safe decision, even though it's a bit tough politically for a small group of voters, and say, sorry, major freight routes are not the place for bikes. Not if there's not enough room. We're not going to allow it for your own safety. And just man up and say, that's it, we're banning it.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've said ever since I got my car licence, why are bikes allowed to ride in clearway zones in clearway times? Well, they should be banned from that time. They ban heavy haulage from running in clearway areas during clearway hours because it's dangerous. Why on earth do they let push bike riders do it? Because they're so dangerous, and all they do, you finally get around them in a truck, and then you come up to a set of lights, and then they just go straight through the red light anyway and keep telling you got to go through it all again, and it's a crap out of you.
You
So,
can interact with that same bike multiple times.
Yes, I know. Yeah. I don't like one interaction with them. But I've got to be careful what I say.
The reality is they're taxpayers. They're right. They've got the right to have some access, but there are limits, and when the safety balance goes too far, you just have to say no.
Well, in the dark, black outfits.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no support vehicle.
Yep.
It is. It just makes your desire and wish to want to be a bike rider, a whole heap of other people, their problem.
It's almost ironic that we're talking about push bike riders during a fuel crisis, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's just not right.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the future holds. And I did have, I think I showed you that I had a message sent to me this morning through Messenger from someone who listens to the podcast saying, have a look at this. And there's a Facebook group, I should say, going around now. And it's about calling a boycott to park up. And could you imagine if every truck in the country just went bugger it and they all pulled over for 3 days, what it would do? And maybe that's an answer to try and scare the government into it and make them realise and make the general public realise how much they rely on us. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't help pay the bills and everything either, as you were saying. It'll hurt doing that, but maybe they need to make a stand.
There's, all of industry probably shares the same feelings about it. But each person has got to look at their family situation and their commitments and their employees, and they've got to make the right ethical decisions based on
Can't have a knee-jerk
the people
reaction.
that are relying on them, and that's a hard one. I mean, I know through all my battles and what I went through, thinking in my head all the time was all my people, all my suppliers, all the people that feed off me. It was like, I've got a responsibility and a commitment here to keep this thing happening. There were plenty of times when the going got tough that it was, some days it was all just, this is all too hard, just jump off a bridge. And then if I'm not around anymore,
then what's going to happen?
It's not my problem anymore. But then that would have been the cowardly thing to do.
And I think
I can't look at that as cowardly. I'm a big believer in mental health and a big advocate for it. And I've been on the edge myself a couple of times, and it's not an easy thing to talk about. I'm in a very, very good space now, thank goodness. I've had a lot of help from it as well, but sometimes it just gets too much.
It's overwhelming.
And, emergency services all hit PTSD eventually. They all have a breaking point, and they just can't do it anymore. And this is what scares me now. You said about people suiciding. Look how many farmers have knocked themselves off over the years when they've gone through droughts and they've had a 5-generation family farm go to the wall, and they just can't cope with it anymore, and their wives. It's terrible. And so it's a scary thing. And I've been going through a massive court case with my car accident that I had 4.5 years ago. And I tell you, the time will come where I'll be having to talk to the Personal Injury Commission saying, just go and do an investigation on how many people in the middle of going through that court case have been getting ridiculed by the insurance company, have ended up just going and knocking themselves off. I said, because he nearly did it to me. And that's going to happen. And I'm going to get really vocal about that because it's a scary thing and they just don't take that into consideration. It's a game.
And I think
feel as though the government's playing a game now, which you can't play.
No.
None of us want to play that game, but they're playing that game regardless.
And it's really important. This industry, again, one of its strengths, it's also a weakness, is we're tough, we can handle it, we don't need to talk. That program that Healthy Heads and Sheds has rolled out, people need to utilise that. But also in terms of, it's understandable people are saying, we'll show them, we'll park up and we'll show them. Let me explain what I think the reality is. That will make those individuals feel good, like they're achieving something. The media will run TV news stories because they'll have footage that looks sexy for their TV. Television news is an entertainment program, first and foremost. They'll have the footage, they'll say how dramatic this is. The next day the media will lose interest by and large, and a stoppage would have to continue for quite a period of time to have a big enough effect on the community for it to actually achieve the result. maybe a protest might get the news and push government, but people shouldn't make them. People need to understand that just doing another Razorback stoppage or wherever it is, even if it's across the country, it is not likely to force the result that we really need. It would send a message, but if people think it's going to solve the problem, I don't think it will, and they might be doing themselves and their business harm. But I've got no doubt, Bruce, there will be people who park up because they just can't afford to keep going.
I think that's what will happen. Is that they're going to park up without doing it intentionally. They're just going to have to.
Yeah.
Their hands going to get forced to park up because they just won't be able to afford to put fuel in anymore. They'll just run out of money.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have those conversations with their banks and to try and get some understanding and some assistance while that period happens, because it's you think about normally fuel about 35% of your business, wages is roughly the same. It's such a fine line for all the other stuff, and if you're having to pay upfront in cash for all these things, which for fuel, like I said to you earlier in this discussion, people are hitting their credit limits so much quicker because fuel is twice the amount. So they're getting half the amount of fuel but paying twice the amount and having to pay for it. There's would be discussions now happening with banks to secure extra funding to buy fuel.
And there needs to be a discussion with a little organisation called the Australian Tax Office. They would be aware of all of this. They'd be watching. Question in my mind is, have they voluntarily made the decision that they'll say, righto, Bruce, we understand times are tough. We understand that you might not be able to pay your BAS on time, and we're not going to charge you interest. Now, when Morrison did his bastardry and destroyed the fuel tax credit, the tax office offered help, but it came at a price with interest. That, in my view, is shameful, particularly in the current climate. Government can and should say, well, it wasn't actually in our budget that we would earn X dollars extra from the GST, and it wasn't in our budget that we'd earn X dollars extra from interest on late BAS payments. We will help in a number of ways. One of those ways is we will allow drawn out payment of BAS, and we will not charge interest.
Yeah.
Why kick a guy or a woman who's down and grind them into the ground and say, here's the bill for your interest? That's as bad as the Chinese government executing somebody and sending the family a bill for the bullet.
Wow. Okay. And that's probably put a pretty good message across there. I don't think that we were going to solve the fuel crisis by having a talk about this, but I think this is more to let people know that they need to brace themselves. And we feel that it is going to get worse. We do know of fuel suppliers. We work with a fuel suppliers that have been limited down to 30% capacity that they can take out in their own tankers. So, and that was a couple of weeks back that it was down to that. And so it is going to get limited for sure, and we're going to suffer. But there's hopefully a few insights there, but people need to know that they're not alone. That's the one thing we don't want people to take it personally if they can't afford to do this, because this is going to be an Australia-wide thing that's going to affect us in a big way, and hopefully the government before too long will turn around and do something about it.
Well, Steve and his counterparts around the country, because operators around the country are feeding that information back through their CEOs, are really trying to lobby hard for some relief or some outcome. Whether they're successful or not, it won't be through lack of them trying. It's like a lot of things. We place the urgency and the importance on these matters. Now it's really up to the Steves and others around the country to really ram that point home to try and get us some relief, because, as I said, I'm really scared, and I'm a lot of the hard-working, soul of the earth people in our industry just don't deserve this.
No.
everything about who they are is on the line, and so they need their businesses to be able to function and succeed. So, and it's all the generations that'll follow. It's all the kids and it's all the other family members and their employees and their family members that are all relying on us to keep going. So somehow we've got to come up with something.
And we're not keeping office hours. It's 24/7. I'm sending emails at 11 o'clock at night, 1 a.m. in the morning. Something occurs, and we are working around the clock. To
we
try
spent the day with
this.
each other yesterday, and your phone was just going mental, and that just goes to show. But it's people like you. I mean, any of us can go on and complain about what's going on and voice their opinion on social media, on Instagram and Facebook and whatever else. But that's not helping anything. We might as well go down to the pub and sit down, have a drink, and talk about it, and say how shit it is. But with people like yourself getting out there in the background, and I'm sure there's definitely other bodies out there, and there's a lot of trucking associations, a good reason to be part of them, are out there sort of helping with this as well. And hopefully that voice is the voice that matters, and that's the one that will get out there.
Yep.
Okay.
And I just think finally, just sort of from an IR perspective, it's really important in these critical times that the focus is on the fuel issue.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of issues about how we all operate, that everyone has views on how it should and shouldn't happen. But right here, right now, this is about survival, and it needs to be focused and targeted on the fuel issue, because that's what keeps us going.
You have an accident on the road and you go into emergency theatre and they can see a little finger twitching and something else happening, but they know that there's an artery that's bleeding out. They deal with the artery. They deal with the high priority stuff first and the other stuff comes later. This is the same. Yeah. And you're dead right. That fuel issue and resolving it is like closing off a bleeding out artery.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, both of you, for coming on and talking about this. We'll see you again next time on The Missing Link, and we'll have a bit more of a talk about Whiteline and what you've been through with that.
Good
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Thank you.